Parshas Pinchas, which is this week's Torah portion, that the Rebbe Sfabrang and spoke in the year Taf Shin Lamed Daled, which is 1974. Interesting enough, it was a few days before I was born, actually. My birthday is this coming week, so I was born in 1974. Let's bring up the text. Okay. So the Rebbe says as follows. To bring in that year was Shabbos Pinchas, not like this year. That Shabbos Pinchas that year, 1974, was already the week that was Mevarchim, that blessed the month of Menachem Av, which we know the beginning of the month of Av is connected to the idea of Tisha B'Av, of the destruction. Well, we already fasted the fast of Tammuz, so it's connected to the 3 weeks. And especially Shabbos Mevarchim Av. Av is the month where the destruction of the temple. So the Rebbe talks about this in the first talk that we're going to learn tonight. Yemei Bein HaMetzarim. So the Rebbe says as follows: the days of Bein HaMetzarim. There's other times you learned why it's called Bein HaMetzarim, but it's like between the narrow spaces. But Bein HaMetzarim is referring to the 3 weeks between the fast of the 17th of Tammuz and the fast of the 9th of Av. Always the Shabbos that we bless the month of Av, Menachem Av, is always going to be in the 3 weeks, because the 3 weeks starts on the 17th of Av, and the 17th of Tammuz. 17th of Tammuz is always before the Shabbos that we bless the new month. These are the days of between two narrow spaces in our history, although they're connected because they lead to each other, which is the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. What's the lesson that we're going to connect to of the Shabbos of Bein HaMetzarim, of the 3 weeks of Parshas Pinchas? That Shetzarach Lifon, this is a very strong message and very much in the spirit, so to say, of the Rebbe's attitude, how we deal with negative times and negative energies. So the Rebbe says that what do we have to do? What's the lesson? How do we have to be active in these 3 weeks, the 3 weeks of mourning of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple? It's Shetzarach Lifal Behem, we have to effect in the 3 weeks itself. Sheyahavchu Yamim Elu, that these days should be transformed. L'sasin l'simcha, to days of happiness and joy. Meaning to say, what does it mean to transform these days into happiness and joy? Shaloi zu b'vad sha'ayidei ha'pu'ulis b'yamim elu yavoyu acher kach l'yamei simcha v'sasin v'simcha. The idea is that the Rebbe always pointed out, it's not that through going through and learning and engaging in the message of the mourning of the 3 weeks, from there we will elevate afterwards to days of happiness and joy, meaning to say, you experience the negative, but in that experience, the silver lining of that is that you get out of the negative and you elevate to positive. The Rebbe says, no, that's not the meaning of transforming the days of the 3 weeks, these days from sadness to happiness. What does it mean to transform them? These days themselves, the 3 weeks themselves, before we even sit and remember the destruction of the temple that happened on the 9th of Av, even before the 9 days begin, which is the intensity of the mourning, of the prep of the mourning of the destruction of the temple. We know the laws of the 9 days, starting from Rosh Chodesh Av. The days themselves should turn into happy days. That these are going to be happy days, that no longer will we even remember that they were bad days, that they're going to become such joyous days. We find this also when it comes to the holiday of Purim and the story of Purim, as we're learning in our tractate Megillah. It's not enough that there's going to be a salvation and a broadness. Revach, it's going to be is a space of broadness and redemption and hatzalah and saving for the Jewish people. That's still not the highest level of redemption. That we're going to have a hatzalah, that we're going to be redeemed or saved from the decree of Haman. That's not the true geula. Eliserim is that we need more than that. And what does it mean more than that? The same day that the enemies of the Jewish people chose to be a day to destroy and murder the Jews, which fell out to be on the 13th of the month of Adar. Nepachu, that same day turned into a day, Asher Yishlu to HaYehudim Hema B'Seineihem, the Jews ruled, in the word Shailet, on their enemies, because Achashverosh, after the plea of Esther and the miracle of Purim, the plea of Esther and Mordechai said, I can't rip up the decree, but I'll allow for you to protect yourself. And the Jewish people protected themselves and killed their enemies instead of, God forbid, vice versa. And the effect was so strong, and the Rebbe quotes this for some reason. I'm not exactly certain why, but the Rebbe quotes this verse many times. Ad she rabim mi'amei aretz misyadim. It was so powerful, the Jewish people's effect, how things turned around, that the 13th not only did not become a day of destruction for the Jewish people, as Haman and his cronies planned, but turned into a day of Hatzalah for the Jewish people, the same day that many of the nations of the world converted to Judaism. There was a huge movement of conversion to Judaism, which is not something necessarily that we celebrate, but it's something that's mentioned during the time of Purim after the victory of the Jewish people. That's what it means in these days. The days of the 3 weeks. It's not enough that we experience the negative. Bein HaMetzarim, like it says, Bein HaMetzarim, from a place of restraint, of contraction. And calling God from Bein HaMetzarim, from a place of restraint. The 3 weeks is a negative time. Limitations. That afterwards, I'm going to come to broadness. El Yisraelim is that what we need is more than that. The place that's narrow itself becomes broad. Like I always say, the Rebbe's ideas are not that we look for the light at the end of the tunnel. We light in the tunnel. The Rebbe doesn't subscribe to the concept even that there's a value to negativity. Everyone has to go through hardships, whether it's the Jewish people as a collective, like it happened in Purim, or the 3 weeks, or as individuals. And then after that, you should know good days are coming. Rabbi Shimon talks about, if we go from Tisha B'Av to Tu B'Av, but we have to go through Tisha B'Av. The Rebbe says we don't have to go through Tisha B'Av. These days, Tisha B'Av itself becomes a day of broadness. There's a famous teaching of the holy Baal Shem Tov that says that there's a tzara. It's a time sometimes we find ourselves in an eis tzara, in a time of a tzar, of a concerning time. It's a tzara, it's a very dangerous time. Is Hili Yaakov, it's a dangerous time for Yaakov. Umimena Yivashea, you will be saved from it. Yivashea from the word Yeshua. You'll have a salvation from this tzara. So the Baal Shem Tov teaches, Ketaris Baal Shem Tov, Shmi tzara atzma nasis ha-Yeshua. It's not that you're going to have a bad situation, and you're going to get out of that bad situation. Mimena, after that bad situation, you'll be saved, or you'll be saved from that bad situation from an outside force. But Mimena, from the situation itself, you will find your salvation. It's the narrow itself brings the salvation within it. And the same word tzara, which means a bad time for the Jewish people. Tzara is bad from the word tsar. That also you could turn the word tzara into tzohar. Tzohar was the stone or the window of light on the boat of Noach, on the Teva. They're the same letters. You could make one word from the 3 letters of Tzadik Reish Hey. You could make tzara, that's a horrible situation, or you can make tzohar, a source of light. It depends how you put the letters together. And the Rebbe is saying that there's such an idea that you have the same letters of a person's situation, of negativity. You just sometimes have to reroute the letters. You have the letters put together in the wrong way. If you know the power of letters, that all the hamshachas, all the flow comes through letters and words. So if you're going to put the letters of your life together, of tzaddik reish hey is going to make up the word tzara, things are horrible in your life, or you turn around and take the same letters and make it into tzohar, into source of light. And the Rebbe says that's not even enough, because that requires you to know that your letters are put in the wrong way. You put it in a way of negative, and then you have to know how to turn it around and find the positive letters. The Rebbe says, we have to find even something better than that. That you find that it's not sometimes what's required in tzara and soihar. Like I said, you have to know that the word tzara is bad, and that's why things are bad. And you have to know that the word sohar means light, and you have to know how to turn around the letters. But the Rebbe says that's still too much effort. The idea is that even as the letters state, Tzadik Reish Hey, which represents Sarah, bad times for Jewish people, like Tsar. Tsar is very negative. Tsara means a very negative situation for the Jewish people. Even if the letters stay the way they are, they still don't mean negative. They mean positive. As the holy Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, writes on the Megillah Sicha, we have a famous explanation from the Tzemach Tzedek about how the whole Eicha, the Megillah Sicha, which is all negative, right? Yirmiyahu is writing about the destruction of the temple. He finds everything positive in Eicha itself. Shemivar has, because the Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek explains, as close to in the Bein HaMetzarim, that there's the positive way you look at the 3 weeks themselves, at Eicha itself. Not that you have to reform the letters. And the Rebbe explains, we find, just coming out this week, last week, Shabbos and Sunday, was Yud Beis Tammuz, which was the redemption of the previous Alter Rebbe, who was imprisoned for spreading Yiddishkeit. He went through tremendous hardships, both physically and spiritually. And it was definitely a very dangerous time at the time, but even afterwards, it had its effect. So the Rebbe says, there's a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe based on the verse, which is we say that verse because it represents a concept. I call out to God in my meitzar, in my restraint. God answers me b'mercha. The God answers me in broadness. That's why we say this verse before we blow the shofar. Because we're blowing the shofar also, right? The actual shofar has both ideas. The bottom of the shofar, the part where we blow from, is narrow, and the end of the shofar is broad. And that's why we say the verse, before we blow the shofar, to symbolize that the idea of blowing the shofar is to take us out of a place of tsar, a place of narrowness, to a place of harchava, that God should bless us and give us a good year. So the Frierdiker Rebbe on the verse of Minameitza Karasa Yudke says Sha'afa Pisha Chosha because of Oisai B'Oisai B'Maseh. Frierdiker Rebbe says he was thinking this idea of Chassidus when he was in prison, and when he was in prison, he was calling out to God from a place of tsar, of narrowness, of tzara. Is his kvar sha'az anani b'merchav Yudke? He already was holding by the answer that God is going to reply to me in archav and broadness. So the Frierdiker Rebbe knew that that's the way Torah says things are. That when you call out to God from a place of restraint, he replies to you in a place of broadness. And when he said, this is what the Torah says, even though at the time when he said it, he was in prison, that affected that it happened. That at the end he was released miraculously from a death sentence to exile, to total freedom from imprisonment, until it led to his coming to the great United States that we're celebrating 250 years this holiday. We know that everything starts from Torah. So if Torah says that you start off calling God from Tsar, and then God answers you from Harchava, you find it in Torah, and from Torah that's how it spills over into the world. As the Torah, as our rabbis have taught us, Istakal by Raisa Bar Alma. Not the way the world thinks. That Torah adjusts itself to the world. God looks into Torah and he creates the world. Torah decides how the world exists. Torah doesn't adopt itself to the world. The world adopts itself to Torah, so to say. God looks into the Torah and he creates the world. So if he looks in the Torah and says that we call out to God in our tsar, God answers us in a broadness. There's an amazing thing. Even the very fact, the ability that there's lies, the world is full of lies, right? The olam is the olam sheker. A world of lies, right? You don't have to, that's not something you have to sell someone, that the world's full of lies. Open up the news, read any articles about Eretz Yisrael, about Jews, about what's going on, about America itself. You can read the lies that people are spilling all over the world, right? So you don't need any explanation or proof that the world is full of lies. But where is the source that there's lies in the world? The Torah acknowledges that there's a concept of lies. How does the Torah acknowledge it? The Alter Rebbe brings down Tanya. God decided, because they open up the Torah, and the Torah comes before the world. And what does it say in the Torah? The Torah says that there's laws, and in the laws there's the laws of Bab Metzia. And in the laws of Bab Metzia, in the tractate of Bab Metzia, talks about two people that will argue about who owns this talis. One person says Kula Shali, it's all mine, and the other one says Kula Shali, it's all mine. And obviously it can't belong 100% to both people. If they said part of it is mine, part of it is mine, there's no argument. But if someone says this coat belongs to me, and this next person says, no, this coat belongs to me, So the Torah talks about such a scenario. And the Torah says, Ruven kach, derech mashal. Shimon kach, if Ruven, as an example, says one thing, and Shimon says another thing, this is all mine, my coat, it's my coat. Yepsak, so the ruling is, Beneim kach v'kach, the Torah says, what do we do in such a scenario? If two people are holding a coat and both say, what is a talis? A talis is an outer garment, right? So what is a person? Two people holding a coat. This is my coat. This is my coat. You go to a shul. You go to a restaurant, right? Both people grab the coat. This is my coat. There's no paper to hold to prove it's yours. So the Torah says, what do we do in such a scenario? It says, Yochai, you have to divide it, sell it, and cut it in half, or sell it and give everyone 50% of the money. What else are we supposed to do? We have no proof who it belongs to. But the Torah acknowledges that there's a scenario that two people could say that. It means two people could lie. There's surely someone lying. It can't belong to 100% to both of them. Kedivre Gemara Masechus B'Metzia, the Gemara teaches us in the tractate about Metzia. And the law discusses this question. And because the law discusses this question, the Rebbe says an amazing thing: is that's where there's a possibility for lie in the world. And if you're going to say that Moshe just decided this law, it doesn't come from God, then you're considered a heretic. It means God discussed the concept that two people could be arguing. One person is surely lying, and the law is so and so. And that's from this concealment that the Torah talks about, such a concealed scenario, that two people could be saying, when one person is for sure not telling the truth, we don't know who that person is, but one person for sure is not telling the truth, that allowed for sheker to be in the world. Now, obviously, God had his divine reasons for it, because we have to overcome that. But where's the source for it? Any situation, not just the situation of the response that we get out of a bad situation. Like the Alter Rebbe always says, why do we put the snake on the stick towards heaven? Is not that we should look away from our troubles and find God. We should recognize that our troubles themselves come from God, whatever that means. And then you know what you're dealing with. If a person thinks that the snake that we learned about in last week's Parsha is biting you, and you say, oh, the snake is negative, I'm going to run to God. So then you're saying basically that negative has its own source. And you have to run away from bad to go to God. That's good. But Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, he put the snake on the stick and said, this snake that you're dealing with is obviously something that you, in your relationship with God. Why is there a snake biting you in the first place? What's going on in your life? You can't run away from the snake and go to God. Recognize that the snake comes from God. And then you deal with it. Then you deal with why is there a snake chasing me? Why would God send the snake at me? So the same thing, when we're talking about limitations, there's situations of meitzar, not just in our life materially, but even in our efforts to serve God. Not everything comes easy. There's meitzar, things are coming, but let's say we make a resolve. We want to serve Hashem, we want to do good things, and we say, oh, why isn't it easy? Because mina meitzar, things start from negative, things don't start off right away good, easy. The Rebbe explains, the soul itself never goes into exile. Meaning to say, the godly soul is never at risk. It's only the way the soul is in the body. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe said when he was in prison, that you could take our bodies to prison, you can't take my soul to prison. Is what does it mean to put the godly soul into a meitzar, into restraint? It's not something that's possible. So what can it happen? There could be an experience where the soul is limited. Meitzar is limitations in its ability to perform in service of godliness. The Rebbe explains. What is a meitzar? That even if a person reaches the level of the highest level of service, as long as your service to God is measured and limited, that's narrow space. As long as your mindset, even in serving God, is where do I start and where do I finish? You know, when someone comes in and says, what time does your minyan, there's a lot of people to ask when you go into minyan, unfortunately, they don't ask when's the minyan start. They ask when's the minyan over. Before I even join the minyan, I want to know what time I'm going to be finished. So I know this is a minyan, I want to daven in. Maybe you daven slow and I want to daven fast. So when that's limitations. The Rebbe says like this: when it comes to a person's davening and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, a person has to be out of limitations. You can't be in a mindset of limitations. And again, the difference between the mindset of limitations doesn't translate necessarily. You can look at two people and they could start davening at the same time and they could do all the things the same. If you're in the mindset of limitations, everything is limited. When you have the mindset of broadness, even the smallest action is in the way of broadness. Broadness is not in quantity, it's in quality. It's not like, okay, I'm going to do another thing. It's a mindset. It's how you approach it in Yiddishkeit. A person who's in a narrow space, then it could be a very big space, but it's a big, narrow space. A person who's in a broad space, it could seem very small, but it's broad. There's no limitations, even on the smallest thing that they do. And the Rebbe says that's how a person has to serve Hashem, with no limitations. Beyond limitations and measurements. That's true broadness. Essential broadness. Without any limitations. Where does it show itself? It shows itself how you approach things. It shows how do you look at every situation. As long as you're going to be a person, like you live your whole life like that, and everything on paper is perfect. You're a perfect Jew. God's very proud of you. There's a whole band of people, angels waiting for you after 180 years. The red carpet, you go straight to Garden of Eden, but you're a person that lived limited. Then you're living in a space of restraint. And the Rebbe gives another example, the dugma. When it comes to the commandment of giving charity. The Torah, when you ask the Torah, if you opened up a sefer and you went to your Rav and said, how much do I have to give tithing? Tithing is the basic is 10%. Meiser is 10%. If you want to be a person who's more strict, a more desirable person in tzedakah, so you upgrade it from between 10% to 20%, 1/5, 1/10 to 1/5. And then a person says, what do you mean? To go more than 1/5? Open up the Gemara says, if you want to splurge, you can't splurge more than 1/5 in your charity. The Rebbe says you shouldn't splurge. That's a very harsh language. The Rebbe asks, again, everything is how you determine the words you use, not just the words you use, but how you apply the words. You could have the word splurging, but it's all in the context. What's the message? When a person says don't splurge beyond 20% of 1/5, means to say is that what you're doing is not really cool, but there's a limit. Calm down. Don't give more than 1/5 of your money to charity. The Rebbe says they could have said it nicer. They could have said splurge up to 50, up to 1/5. Means you could have put the splurge on the positive instead of the splurge on the negative. Nevertheless, the rabbis didn't use that. They used the splurge on the negative, saying don't go past 1/5, not say go up to 1/5. Right? It's a whole different mindset of how you look at charity. Because when someone says don't splurge beyond 1/5, it's kind of saying the charity is a splurge. But when you say you splurge up to 1/5, then the splurge is a positive space. But the rabbis didn't choose that. So a person may think, oh, surely I don't have to give more than 1/4. The rabbis even use a negative term for it. But that's the Rebbe says a person who lives in limitations. But because like the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe's in a quote from Tanya. But there's a way to splurge beyond without limitations. Why? Like the Rebbe writes in Tanya, in a Geras HaKodesh, that a person shouldn't splurge beyond 1/5. That's if you're a perfect person. You're perfect. You never sin. So, or you chose. You're cheap. You didn't want to spend money in tzedakah. You said to God, pain me. I'm going to fast. I'm going to torture myself so I can cleanse myself from my sins and I don't have to pay for them. So you're not going to spend money. You're going to suffer physically. Okay, the Alter Rebbe says whatever. If that's what your choice, that's the kind of person you are. There's no greater limitations than that, right? But if you're not perfect and you still have a lot of fixing, no one would ever tell a doctor, even if you don't like it. If someone came to you and said, "Listen here, sir," or "Listen here, young woman, I have some bad news for you. We have a cure. You're very sick. I have a cure for you, but it's going to cost you more than you're ready to pay. You're only ready to pay $100 for your medicine. I'm sorry to tell you, the medicine is going to cost $200. But if you take the medicine, you're going to live. If you don't take the medicine, you're going to die." So a normal person may not be enthusiastic about it, but at least you know that this is an option to live. You're not going to say, I'd rather die and keep the $200 in the bank. What for? So same thing, spiritual healing. If you're not perfect and you need to cure your soul, then it's not about splurging, about you're giving something in the way of splurging. You're paying for your spiritual healing. It's going to as it's brought up in another section of time. Money doesn't mean anything when the money is going to save your soul. So this that the Torah says, that halacha says you don't have to splurge beyond 5%, 1/5. It's talking about a person who's not doing it for spiritual healing. But if you need spiritual healing, that's nothing you're not talking about splurging here. You're paying a bill. The Rebbe says, don't go into that space of measurement. We talk about this many times. Dinim, when we say dinim, we say judgment. When you're judging, you judge others, you judge yourself. It's a space of limitations. God reflects us. God is Hashem tzilcha. God is like our shadow. If you make a movement in your hand, the shadow makes a movement. You behave in a limited way, God behaves limited back to you. God tests people to see when they can go out of their space. When you go out of your space, so then you say, you know what? God says this person is ready for harchava. God needs to see that you're ready. What happens if God wants to give you an abundance of blessing and you're still in a narrow space? What's the point of the blessing? He wants you to do something with it. Someone asked me a few weeks ago, we were learning in the bracha that says that the Alter Rebbe talks about that the Birchat Kohanim, the bless of the Kohen, gives everything in a rush, an abundance of blessing fast. So the person asked me, why do I need a blessing fast? Let me get a slow blessing, fill up my tank slowly. What's the rush? I said, what do you mean, what's the rush? I said, the whole point is when you get a huge blessing fast, you could start doing things. If you have to wait your whole life for the blessing to come out, when are you supposed to do things? You're pacing yourself. Don't pace yourself with God. God wants to give you a blessing right now. You're young, full of energy. You could do things. Go out there and conquer the world. Make it into a place of godliness. It's not that you're supposed to get a blessing and therefore you retire. You get double active because now you have more tools at your disposal. So the same thing over here. God wants to entrust you with a blessing. But if you're going to be limited, then what is he giving you? You're going to be stay in a space of limitations. So the idea is like this. Every creation in the world. That's the Rebbe says that by the way, this is a chidush. The idea that a person, a yid, a Jew, could get out of their limitations is not normal. Why is it not normal? Because creation, by definition, is limited. A nivra, a creation, is limited, and therefore a creation doesn't really have an ability to get out of its space because it's tachtonim, it's in this world. And God, that there's a disconnect between how things are in this lower world that's much more limited than how things are in higher worlds. God said that the lower spaces stay in the lower spheres and the higher spaces stay in the higher spheres. Right? That's how God created the world. The two separate things. The higher space and lower space. As the Friedrich Rebbe said, when he says it's a decree, that God decreed that the upper space stays in the upper space and the lower space stays in the lower space. The word gezer in Hebrew also means abgeschnitten, cut off. That's what they call abschernish in Hebrew. When you cut the hair in Yiddish, it's Hebrew is Yiddish abschernish, but gezerah is to cut the hair. When things are disconnected, there's totally no connection between the lower spheres and the higher spheres, and that's how God created the world. So if any creation, the truth is that even the higher spheres are also limited. Their limitations are less because they're higher worlds. But in the lower world, in Tachtonim, they're surely very limited. And if these had any connection between the lower worlds and the higher worlds, it wouldn't be called cut off. Yes, in this chain of creation, there's levels. But no matter what the creation is and what world it is, you can't get past your root. You created with the limitations, and that's as far as you could go. That's why the angels are called oimdim. They stand still. Only Jewish people are called mahalchim, moving. You can move out of your space. You can't go out of your limitations. Ish Yisrael, what did God bless the Jewish people with? You could get out of that limitation. Any limitation is limited. Put a person in a palace that has 100 rooms and is huge and everything, and say you can't leave that space. It's a limitation. I was reading yesterday in the news about a former dictator that we all know, that he went to Russia. So they're talking about he has this apartment, but he can't leave. So what is he? Basically, he's in home arrest in a big home, but he's in home arrest. But a Jewish person, you get out of our space. Limitless. When God gave the Jewish people Matan Torah, by definition, he said there is no more limitations. And again, what does it mean? And like the Rebbe is going to say over here, it doesn't mean limitless is not in size. Limitless could come in the smallest package, like the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, in the Holy of Holies, by the Aron, was the infinite of God. Why? Because you could take the largest of things and bring it into the smallest of spaces. The idea is like this. When God created man, Atim Kirin Adam, and talking about the Jewish people like we learned in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, Hashem Adam Le'elim, because we're like Adam. Adam means to be comparable. Like it says, Nasa Adam et Salmeinu b'Tikkun Museni, like we learned in this week's Gemara class. Make man in our form and our image. Though yes, man was also created with one of the 10 utterances, and the 10 utterances by definition is limiting. Like the rest of the world is created, God said, Nasa Adam. Nevertheless, the Nasa Adam is just the keli, is the vessel. But the main emphasis is that in our vessel, in our Nasa Adam, make man, we also have the statement of B'tzalmeinu Kid Musenu. Man, which seems limited, really is connected to the godliness, which is in our form and our image, the image and form of God, which is limitless, not limited. Not only in our form, but also in our image. Means even as a person is down in this world. And that doesn't mean you need to sleep and you need to eat and you need to do everything that everyone else has to do, go to the restroom, all the limitations that you have. That doesn't change the fact that you're in a form and image of God. So we open up the Shulchan Aruch and you learn the laws of tznius. The laws of tznius is about the idea of Tzalmeinu Kud Meseinu. Even when a person is in this world, seemingly, again, you have the same limitations. You're not Superman. You can't go 5 days without sleeping. You can't go 30 days without eating. You have all the limitations, seemingly. You still have the power of limitless. Because just like if we're made in God's image and form, just like God is combining limited and limitless, like I said, the Holy of Holies has the limited space of the Holies of Holies, has the bligvul, the limitless of godliness. And you can ask, how is that possible? Because God's not limited. He's not even limited to be limitless. If you think in your mind that God could only be in a way of limitless, the way you understand it means that he can't be in the Holy of Holies, that it's limiting God. I want to be limited to the Holy of Holies. Don't tell me, I don't need to eat steak every night. I want to be happy with a tuna fish sandwich. What do you mean? You're a king. That you're limiting me. Who says I want to eat steak every night? Don't limit to me in how you project what's limited and what's limitless. It's brought down in the Chassidus Sefer. The infinite of God is completeness, without any lacking of anything. If you're going to tell to God, if you're going to describe God, that God could only be limitless, but he can't be limited, because limited is not something of godliness, then you're saying God's limited. He's not complete. Why? Because he doesn't have the ability to be limited. And therefore, the Jewish people also, we have our limitations, but we also have the ability to bring in limitless, b'li gvul and gvul. A Jew has the ability, and again, you could look at a person. You have to subscribe to that about yourself. It means it's there. You have it, 100%. But you have to subscribe to that about yourself. That is that you're not subscribing to the limitations to limit you. That even in your limited abilities, you're going to show limitless. And how do you do that? It's a mindset. It's a total mindset. A Jewish person is supposed to be in a mindset of broadness. As long as you're limited. As long as you don't subscribe to it, you don't identify with your ability to be limitless. So you're living in a place of narrow space. Or Pratis Yais, the Rebbe adds that. In everything that you do, you have to have this. The Rebbe talked about this even more and more as time went on. This is 1974. In the end, the Rebbe is talking about the lights of Tohu in the vessels of Tikkun. There's a revolutionary idea that the Rebbe said it. You could say words, but in Kabbalah that was an unaccepted reality what the Rebbe was talking about. Up until the Rebbe was saying these ideas, the accepted idea was that chaos is chaos and Tikkun is Tikkun. You can't have the world of organization with the world of chaos. And the Rebbe says we could organize chaos. That's what I expect of you. I want you to organize chaos. And how can you organize chaos? It's like that's chaotic. Because even if a person lives in a space of chaos, no limitations, that's a different space. The Rebbe says, no, I want you to take chaos and bring it into and organize it. Bring it into the world of Tikkun. Take the lights of Teo and bring it to the world of Tikkun. The Rebbe spoke about that in the 1990s, 91, 92. And it's a revolutionary idea because you don't find that in other books of Chassidus or other books of Kabbalah. But Prat Yoser, the Rebbe says more than that. Our whole mindset of service of God has to be this way, of combining limitations with limitless. In general, like the Rebbe says, a person has two mindsets. One mindset is my logical approach to life. I understand it, I comprehend it, and I act on it. But that's all limited. Because why is it limited? It's as much as you understand something. You could only be in that limitation as long as there's a rule to that. As long as it makes sense to you, you're okay. But then a person sometimes is in a place of self-sacrifice. By definition, self-sacrifice is not just self-sacrifice because you have a gun at your head. Self-sacrifice is also you're giving self. What is self? Is everything you understand. It doesn't make sense to you. But because God you know that God needs you to do this right now. You don't even understand why He needs you to do it. But you know you need to do this right now. It makes no sense to you, but still you can do it because you have self-sacrifice. You give over self. Everything you understand, everything you lived up to that moment, you're sacrificing because that's what God wants. That's Mesiras Nefesh. And where do you get the ability to have Mesiras Nefesh self-sacrifice? Is because your soul rooted in the oneness of God. And in that oneness of God, there's no limitations. Your oneness is to be one with God. That has no limitations. It translates itself surely when a person will ready to die for God. That's Mesiras Nefesh, but it's not just to die for God, to live for God. But how do you really elevate that is not to have two parts of your life. That you have one part of your life when you're very in the logical space. Everything is logical, makes sense. And when you reach a point that there's a trigger that you have to go on the turbo mode of Mesiras Nefesh, that's another reality of who you are. That's another you. That's you in Mesiras Nefesh mode. The Rebbe says that's two yous. That doesn't work. Again, the Rebbe spoke about this the last mimer that he gave in Atat Tesava. The idea is to combine the two. It's not enough that you have times. That in your regular times, normal times, and nothing's pressing, there's no emergency going on, there's no crisis, then you're living a logical life. There's times sometimes there's a trigger for whatever reason. There's the Mesiras Nefesh within you, the self-sacrifice is what's demanded. When you come to a test, whatever it's a physical test, a spiritual test, a moral test. So then you have to kick in to Mesiras Nefesh when you're tested, but otherwise, that's dormant, and you go back to your logical life. The Rebbe says that's also a limitation. To only be able to live Mesiras Nefesh when the crisis comes, that's a limitation. The Rebbe says this is what the Rebbe talked about, that the lights of chaos in the world of Tikkun, that even when you're in your logical time, you're still saturated with the mindset of Mesiras Nefesh, even if it doesn't translate. You can't see it. It's where you are, and then by you the Mesiras Nefesh is constant. It just doesn't. Sometimes it reveals itself. Sometimes it won't be revealed itself. But within you, it's always saturated. It's always there. The Rebbe gives an example. We'll finish with this. This idea that there's everything, that there's no. You don't have to go out of you don't have to go to another space. Even in your normal, you're connected to the abnormal in a positive way, the Mesiras Nefesh. This we find by Rabbi Shimon, the author of the Zohar. The Rebbe says We find two stories of tzaddikim. The Rebbe says an amazing thing over here. You read the Sikshamim. We know there's two famous stories about, there's many times, but there's two famous stories the Talmud tells us about when the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael needed rain. One time is the story of Choni HaMagel. Everyone knows the story. As children, we learn the story. Who was Choni HaMagel when he lived? We're not exactly sure. Either the end of the first temple or the beginning of the second temple, but he was definitely in the early stages before the time of the Mishnah. And Choni HaMagel in times of the temple. Choni HaMagel, the word Magel means a circle. Then what happened? The story is, let's just tell the story first. Because the story is told in the Talmud, which is in the Torah, there's a lesson. What do we say about Choni HaMagel? They told him that there's no rain. It was a big dry drought. They asked him to pray for rain. So what did Choni HaMagel do? And that's why he got the name Magel. Magel means circle. Choni of the circle. He made a circle with his stick in the earth, and he stood in the circle. He said to God, Master of the universe, I'm swearing, with your great name, I will not leave this circle until you have compassion on your children, i.e., give them rain. And of course, the story happened that it started to drizzle. He says, I'm not talking about drizzle. Start to pour. He says, I'm not talking about pouring. I want healthy rain. So it came a healthy rain. And the Gemara, by the way, wasn't the rabbis weren't happy with Choni HaMagel. They were going to punish him for that. They said he was playing games with God. You can't condition God. But the story goes down as tradition as the Choni HaMagel. He was the one who did it. He made the circle and God listened. The Rebbe asks on the question itself. Why did he have to make a circle? Why did he have to make a whole scene about it? That everyone knows that Choni HaMagel made a circle. He made a whole story, everyone, wow, Choni's making a circle and he's standing there. He could have done it a little less, with a little more modestly. He just stood in a corner. He could have, without making the whole scene, he could have just said, to tell God, I'm in the corner. I'm not leaving the corner until you answer. What do you have to make a circle for? In the Chassidus, they talk about this. Why do you make a circle? In an eagle, he wanted to go into the space of the circle. We know in Chassidus and Kabbalah it talks about there's a difference between the circle and the line. A circle is out of the limitations. Eagle and kav, right? Makiv and pnimi. So there's the eagle is he said, for me to get rain, I have to go out of the space of the norm and go into the space of the circle. The idea of a circle is that's all equal, right? There's no top and bottom of a circle. A kav, a line, has a top of the line and bottom of the line. There's no top, there's no bottom. Reish v'seif, beginning or end. It's not like a square or mashrulish or a triangle. Which is different. That's we have if you have, like my father used to make round tables, so there shouldn't be a head table. No one's sitting at the head, everyone's equal. Going into the eagle, into the circle, is like Mesiras Nefesh. You're going out of the limitations of the world. Everyone has the ability to go into their circle. I feel kal shebekal. Even the most simple person can get out of, even if you're kal, even according to the line, right? You're on the bottom of the spectrum. Bonagid, right? If you're spiritually a wood chopper or a water carrier, you're not the head. You're not the head of the Sanhedrin. You're not Reishecha v'Shiftecha. When in the end of the Torah they count. There's different levels. Starting from the heads of the Jewish people to the wood chopper and the water carrier. Nothing against the wood chopper and the water carrier, but it's a description. There's different levels. That's the kav, that's the line. But instead of that, when you go into the circle, everyone's equal. Therefore, when Choni HaMagel wanted to bring rain, he had to make a circle. To say, he symbolized to God that he knew that in order to get rain, because maybe the Jewish people weren't worthy of rain from the perspective of the line, where things are orderly, they weren't worthy of rain. He said, I'm going into the space of the circle. Why? Because Choni HaMagel was all about prayer, and prayer is the highest level of prayer, like we learned, is self-sacrifice. And he went into the space out of limitations, which is like tefillah, Yehiratz, and let it be a new will. But what did Rashbi do? They came to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he said, we need rain. So Rashbi didn't make a whole scene, he didn't go make a circle. He said a Ma'amar Chassidus. He said an idea of Torah. He said a Torah on Hina Matovim Manoim. That's why we sing the song on Lag Bomer, Hina Matovim Manoim. He said a Torah on Hina Matovim Manoim, and it started to rain. He didn't say something that no one understood. He didn't say fancy words that no one, like just like, abracadabra. He said an idea that people understood. Everyone sat at the shiur. They listened to an idea, and the next thing you know, it's raining. He gave an idea with questions and answers. Seemingly he has limitations. But he didn't need to go out of his reality to bring rain. That's what the Rebbe means to be a person who's living limited and limitless together. It means you could say who you are, how you are. Rashbi was about learning Torah. So in his learning Torah, he was able to bring down rain. And in the top, bottom, it's all in the level of orderly. He in his orderly, he had the believable. In his limitations, he had the limitless, and therefore he was able to affect what needed to be affected, even if the world wasn't worthy. That didn't matter, because there was never a part of Rashbi that was subscribed to the limitations. The Berchad Kitra Iskatra because I'm a sign of the world. What's the lesson to us? What can we take from this? No one's going to say I'm Rabbi Shimon by Yochai. But nevertheless, like the Rebbe always said, we don't talk about greatness to describe that once upon a time a great person lived. That doesn't help us anything. What's the difference to me if once upon a time someone great lived? Once upon a time someone great lived means you could be great. Maybe not great exactly like Rashbi, but if they're telling us the story, the Rebbe always said a rule. If you hear a story, and there are especially stories coming from a tzaddik, and especially the stories coming from the Gemara, and the Gemara is part of Torah, and Torah is our lesson, it's not a lesson to tell us that someone once lived that was special. It's a lesson that you have to take from it, that you could act on it. You have to be able to at least begin your activities, especially when it comes to learning, with saturating yourself with the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, not to be limited. When a person, before they sit down and learn, for instance, plug into that, I'm not in the space of limitations. And then you go and sit down to learn right after you daven. Whether you start learning in the middle of the day. Get ready to prepare yourself and say, 1 second. That's one of the reasons we learn after we daven. Because davening is Mesiras Nefesh, and then you take the Mesiras Nefesh and you bring it into your learning. So if you can learn during the day, stop for a second, think that you're not that in this 5 minutes even that you're learning, you're saturating that 5 minutes with limitless. And if you happen to be learning hour by hour, you have to focus every once in a while, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, of the Mesiras Nefesh, that my learning is about self-sacrifice. It's not about being in the space of limitations. Even if at the time of learning, it's hard for you to stay in the reality of self-sacrifice, because then you're very limited into understanding the details. But at least, by Rashbi, even when he learned in the deepest discussions, that itself was saturated with self-sacrifice, with limitless. But at least in your prep for that, you should do that. The Rebbe adds to that. That the idea itself, that the learning itself has to be that you elevate from your low space to the high space. But also, you have to bring above down. And here the Rebbe is going to tell 2 stories. And this is Chabad 101. That one of the things a person may think, that what is the idea of all this avodah, of all this service, is me to leave my space, but I'm leaving everything else behind. The Rebbe says it's not enough. You have to take from above and bring it back down. It's not enough to stay that you personally are going up, running away from the world in a way a little bit like Lachonia Margel, who went into the circle, and then you leave the world down below and you have no connection to it. You have to bring the upper ideas and bring it down to this world and how it translates in actual meaning. Yedua Sipar is known this story. The Rebbe tells 2 stories now that are known. One story he tells the story of the Alter Rebbe that he told many times. I don't have my chavrista today. We'll go a little longer if that's okay with everyone. Yedua Sipar There's a story of the Alter Rebbe. He was standing in a shul on Yom Kippur. Yom HaKadosh, the holiest of all days. Altif v'talis, he's wrapped in a talis. Hifsik upashet is a talis. He was in the middle of davening, I think it was Nila. He took off his talis. V'yotzim Beis HaKnesses, and he left the shul. V'holach l'ktzei year, went to the end of the city. Shesham ha'isei led us that there was a woman who just gave birth. Shenishra levada bebeisa, her husband left her, meaning her husband went to shul, but didn't realize that she still needed attention. She still needed help. She wasn't ready to be left alone in the house, right? And the Alter Rebbe was able to see, all the rest of her family went to shul. And she was in a matzav sakanas nefashos. Her situation turned very critical because she was after childbirth, and her life was in danger. And the Alter Rebbe had to go save her. He went out of the city, he cut wood, and he made a fire and cooked for her. The Rebbe says, imagine this. Even the most simple Jew, is in a place of elevation. Like it says in Shulchan Aruch, all Jewish people are like angels when it comes to Yom Kippur. That's why we all wear white. Even more so, talking about the Alter Rebbe on Yom Kippur. When he's in the talis. He's not alone in his office. He's amongst the other Jewish people. We know from the Baal Shem Tov already that when the Baal Shem Tov davened with others, that's when he had his main elevation. The fact that he was in shul in the talis on Yom Kippur, the Alter Rebbe is at his highest space. So you would think he's in total elyonim, he's totally elevated. But because he never unplugged, he was in tuned. He never lost focus. That someone may need his attention. Af became as high as he was. Hirgish, she felt, somewhere in the corner of a city. There's a woman who just gave birth, that needs his physical help, not his prayers. Needs him to take off his talis and chop wood and cook her soup. That she's gonna, her body and her soul may stop to exist together. She may pass away. Not because someone told him. The Mike Mashman, surely if someone told him, he would do something. He never left. He never was disconnected from people. Because that's not the idea of elevation. If you're disconnected, you're not going to realize someone else's cries. We're not just talking about this woman. This woman's an example. The Rebbe used this when the Rebbe took his leadership in 1950. The Rebbe told the story to show that a person, that the definition of a chassid is that if you can't hear the cry of another person, if you can't feel the pain of another person, what's going on? What's the point of your whole elevation? This is the lesson. Even if you want to elevate yourself, on Yom Kippur with the talis, you have to always be connected to the below. In the bottom line, if something demands your attention right now, you can't say, well, I'm in a spiritual experience now. I'm in the circle. It doesn't work like that. What do you mean? I'm giving God my Mesiras Nefesh. I'm totally dedicated to God now, but spiritually, that's not what God needs. So that person may think, what do I have to do with that person who never put on tefillin? That person who didn't come to shul? That person who doesn't know about Shabbos candles? I should work on myself to bring my spiritual elevation. It says that's not the point of a chassid. That means the highest you are, that is also limiting. If you could only be in Mesiras Nefesh and you can't be connected to someone else, you can't hear the cry, the spiritual cry of another person, that's limiting. But the Rebbe says on the contrary. The point is that on your highest level, you have to hear the child crying. The Rebbe says another story, the story of the Rebbe HaMetzarim, the Mittler Rebbe. The famous story that the Mittler Rebbe lived in the house of the Alter Rebbe, his father. His son fell out of the cradle, and he was so engrossed in his study, he didn't hear his child crying. And the Alter Rebbe told him, you can never be in a place where you're sitting there, you don't hear a child crying. The Rebbe says, he's talking in 1974, and it's applicable to today. There's tens and hundreds of Jewish children, whether they're actual children, or they're spiritual children. The children when it comes to Torah mitzvahs. They're crying, they want help. You have to help them. You can't say I'm on a spiritual trip now. Specifically when you help them. It's going to be your elevation. That this brings the light for everyone. The Rebbe continues in this talk. I'm going to stop over here. But the point of the Rebbe is that the idea is that this is what it means to transform the idea of Bein HaMetzarim. Don't subscribe to the limitations. Don't subscribe to the limitations even on the highest level. Be a person of Archava. If you're going to live in a place of Archava, then on the contrary, and you bring that into the space of limitations, not to run away from you. You don't have to run. You don't have to draw a circle on the ground and run into the circle. In your space, in your 24/7, you're saturated with godliness. That's the highest level of avodah. That's how I love service. That's how you don't subscribe to the limitations, even the limitations of the destruction of the temple of the 3 weeks. All right, everyone, have a wonderful Shabbos. Take care.